On November 25, 1988, a chilly autumn evening in Misato City, Saitama Prefecture, 17-year-old high school student Junko Furuta was cycling home from her part-time job, unaware that her life was about to change forever. As she pedaled along the dimly lit streets, 4 teenage boys lay in wait, their malevolent intentions masked by the encroaching darkness. In a flash, Junko's world turned upside down. The boys, led by 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano, ambushed her, knocking her off her bicycle. Using a ruse of offering help, Miyano lured the frightened girl to a nearby warehouse where he revealed his true, sinister nature. Threatening her with claims of Yakuza connections, he raped her and set in motion what would become one of the most horrific crimes in Japanese history. Over the next 44 days, Junko Furuta endured unimaginable torment at the hands of her captors. Held prisoner in the home of one of the perpetrators, 16-year-old Nobuharu Minato, she was subjected to repeated rapes, savage beatings, and grotesque acts of torture. The 4 main culprits, Miyano, Minato, 17-year-old Joe Ogura, and 16-year-old Yasushi Watanabe, along with over 100 other youths who cycled through the house, turned Junko's ordeal into a twisted game of escalating cruelty. The brutality inflicted upon Junko defies comprehension. She was raped over 400 times by her captors and their associates. They beat her, burned her with cigarettes, inserted foreign objects into her genitals, and forced her to eat live cockroaches. They made her drink her own urine and set fireworks off inside her mouth. As the weeks wore on, the torture grew more extreme. They dropped barbells on her stomach, hung her from the ceiling, and used her body as a punching bag. Through it all, Junko's spirit refused to break. She begged for her life, tried to escape, and even called the police at one point, only to be punished more severely for her attempts at freedom. Her captors forced her to call her parents and tell them she had run away, cruelly prolonging their anguish as they searched desperately for their missing daughter. On January 4, 1989, after 44 days of hell, Junko's battered body could take no more. Following a particularly savage beating involving an iron barbell, she went into convulsions and died. Her tormentors, showing no remorse, disposed of her corpse by encasing it in concrete and abandoning it in a 55-gallon drum at a construction site. When Junko's body was discovered on January 23, 1989, the brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through Japanese society. The case, which came to be known as the concrete-encased high school girl murder case, shattered the nation's sense of safety and exposed a dark underbelly of juvenile delinquency and societal indifference. The most chilling aspect of the case was not just the cruelty of the main perpetrators, but the complicity of so many others. Over 100 people knew about or participated in Junko's torture, yet no one intervened or reported it to authorities. This collective silence, this failure of an entire community to protect an innocent girl, forced Japan to confront uncomfortable truths about its society. As details of Junko's ordeal emerged, the public reacted with horror and outrage. How could such a thing happen in modern Japan? How could so many people be involved without anyone stopping it? The case sparked national debates about juvenile crime, the education system, and the breakdown of traditional social bonds. The brutal murder of Junko Furuta stands as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the consequences of societal indifference. It is a tragedy that continues to haunt Japan decades later, serving as a grim cautionary tale and a call to vigilance against the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of any community. As we delve deeper into this horrific case, we will explore the backgrounds of the perpetrators, the excruciating details of Junko's 44 days of torment, the subsequent investigation and trial, and the lasting impact this crime has had on Japanese society. It is a story of unimaginable cruelty, systemic failures, and a young life cut brutally short, a story that demands to be told, no matter how difficult it may be to hear. About the perpetrators. To understand the horror of what happened to Junko Furuta, we must first examine the 4 main perpetrators who orchestrated her torment. Their backgrounds provide a chilling glimpse into the factors that can shape young minds into instruments of unspeakable cruelty. Hiroshi Miyano, the 18-year-old ringleader, was born on April 30, 1970, in Tokyo's Adaki ward. Despite being raised in a relatively affluent household, Miyano's childhood was far from idyllic. His father, a successful securities broker, was largely absent, often staying with a mistress. His mother, a piano teacher, compensated for her husband's absence with overly strict discipline and unrealistic academic expectations. This dysfunctional family dynamic left young Miyano starved for affection and validation. From an early age, he exhibited behavioral problems, stealing money from his family to buy snacks and facing harsh punishments when caught. His mother's response to his misbehavior was often physical, beating him with a shoehorn or forcing him to kneel for hours as punishment. Despite his mother's efforts to cultivate his intellect through English lessons and intensive study sessions, Miyano's academic performance was mediocre. He found his niche in judo, excelling in the sport during middle school and even placing second in a Tokyo-wide tournament. However, this period of relative stability was short-lived. Upon entering high school, Miyano faced severe bullying from his judo team seniors. The abuse went beyond typical hazing, with Miyano being repeatedly thrown, choked unconscious, and even set on fire with insecticide and a lighter. The trauma of this experience, coupled with his unstable home life, pushed Miyano further towards delinquency. After dropping out of high school, Miyano briefly worked at a tile factory but soon fell in with local Yakuza-affiliated groups. He began engaging in petty crimes, including assault, breaking and entering, and theft. By the time he encountered Junko Furuta, Miyano had developed a sadistic streak and a complete disregard for others' well-being. Joe Ogura, born on May 11, 1971, came from a broken home. His parents divorced when he was young, leaving him in the care of a mother who worked nights and was rarely present. From an early age, Ogura was forced to take on adult responsibilities, caring for his younger sister and managing household chores. The lack of parental guidance and affection deeply affected Ogura. His mother, who struggled with the Japanese language, often resorted to physical abuse and verbal tirades in her native Tagalog when frustrated with her children. This volatile home environment, coupled with periods of abandonment when his mother returned to her home country, left Ogura with deep-seated emotional scars. Seeking escape from his troubled home life, Ogura began associating with delinquent groups. He found a sense of belonging among these outcasts, but this association also drew him deeper into a world of petty crime and violence. By the time of Junko's abduction, Ogura had developed a follower mentality, eager to please those he saw as stronger or more dominant. Nobuharu Minato, born on December 16, 1972, came from a seemingly more stable background. His father was a factory manager, and his family appeared normal on the surface. However, Minato's parents, while not neglectful, failed to provide the emotional support and guidance he needed. Described by his parents as shy and stubborn, Minato's behavior grew increasingly problematic as he entered adolescence. His stubbornness manifested as defiance against authority, leading to frequent conflicts with teachers and classmates. Despite his parents' attempts to correct his behavior, their methods were ineffective, and Minato continued to spiral into delinquency. Minato's home became the primary location for Junko's captivity and torture. The fact that this could occur in a family home, with parents present, raises disturbing questions about the level of supervision and communication within the household. Yasushi Watanabe, born on December 18, 1971, was perhaps the least assertive of the four main perpetrators. Described as introverted and easily influenced, Watanabe dropped out of Night High School and fell in with Miyano's group, seeking acceptance and a sense of belonging. Watanabe's role in the crime, while less active than the others, was no less crucial. His compliance and silence in the face of Junko's suffering highlight the dangers of passive participation in evil acts. These four young men, each damaged in their own way by neglect, abuse, or societal pressures, came together to form a perfect storm of cruelty. Their individual insecurities and traumas, rather than inspiring empathy, seemed to fuel a collective sadism that found its ultimate expression in the torture of Junko Furuta. The psychology behind their actions is complex and deeply disturbing. Miyano, as the leader, seemed to revel in the power he held over Junko and his accomplices. His experience of powerlessness in the face of bullying and parental neglect may have driven him to assert dominance in the most brutal way possible. Ogura, accustomed to abuse and neglect, appeared to view cruelty as a normal part of human interaction. His eagerness to please Miyano and the others suggests a desperate need for acceptance and validation, even at the cost of another's suffering. Minato's willingness to allow his home to become the site of such horrific acts speaks to a profound moral disconnect. Whether driven by a desire for excitement, a need to impress his peers, or a genuine lack of empathy, his actions reveal a chilling capacity for evil lurking beneath a facade of normalcy. Watanabe's passive participation demonstrates the insidious nature of group dynamics in criminal behavior. His failure to intervene or report the crime, even as it escalated to unimaginable levels of brutality, illustrates how easily individuals can become complicit in evil through inaction. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case is the involvement of so many others beyond the four main perpetrators. Over 10 people, mostly young men and boys, participated in or knew about Junko's torture. This widespread complicity points to a broader societal issue, a culture of silence and non-intervention that allowed this crime to continue for 44 agonizing days. Many of these peripheral participants later claimed they were afraid of Miyano and his rumored Yakuza connections. Others simply saw it as a form of entertainment, a real-life enactment of the violent fantasies they encountered in manga and video games. Some even paid money to participate in Junko's abuse, treating her as less than human, a mere object for their amusement. This collective failure of empathy and moral courage is perhaps the most disturbing legacy of the case. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature and the social dynamics that can lead ordinary people to commit or condone extraordinary acts of cruelty. As we examine the backgrounds and motivations of Junko's tormentors, we are left with a profound sense of unease. These were not monsters in the traditional sense, but products of a society that failed them in various ways. This realization does not excuse their actions but rather challenges us to consider how we can create a world where such failures are less likely to occur. The case of Junko Furuta serves as a stark reminder of the potential for cruelty that exists within human societies. It challenges us to remain vigilant, to speak out against injustice, and to foster a culture of empathy and intervention. Only by confronting the darkest aspects of human nature can we hope to prevent such tragedies in the future. Details of the incident. The 44 days of Junko Furuta's captivity represent a descent into a hell on earth, a period of sustained cruelty that pushes the boundaries of human comprehension. To recount the details of her ordeal is a harrowing task, but one that is necessary to understand the full scope of this tragedy and to honor Junko's memory. The nightmare began on November 25, 1988. Junko, a diligent student and part-time worker at a plastic molding factory, was cycling home after her shift. It was a route she had taken many times before, but on this night, fate had a cruel twist in store. As she pedaled along the streets of Misato City, Hiroshi Miyano and Nobuharu Minato were prowling the area on their motorcycles, looking for potential victims to rob or assault. Miyano spotted Junko and instructed Minato to knock her off her bicycle. Minato complied, sending Junko tumbling to the ground before speeding away. Miyano, playing the role of a concerned passerby, approached Junko and offered to help. He told her that the person who knocked her down was crazy and that he had also been threatened. Feigning concern for her safety, he offered to escort her home. Trusting this seemingly kind stranger, Junko allowed Miyano to lead her to a nearby warehouse. It was here that the mask of civility dropped, and Miyano revealed his true, monstrous nature. He threatened Junko, claiming to be a Yakuza member and warning her that if she didn't obey him, her life and her family's lives would be in danger. Terrified and overpowered, Junko was raped by Miyano in the warehouse. This was just the beginning of her ordeal. Miyano, joined by Joe Ogura and Yasushi Watanabe, took Junko to a house in the Aase district of Adaki, Tokyo. This house, belonging to Minato's parents, would become Junko's prison for the next 44 days. From the very beginning, the level of cruelty inflicted upon Junko was extreme. The four main perpetrators, joined by a rotating cast of other young men, subjected her to repeated rapes. They beat her, using their fists, feet, and various objects. They stubbed out cigarettes on her body, leaving painful burns. In the early days of her captivity, Junko made desperate attempts to escape or call for help. During one moment when she was left alone, she managed to call the police. However, before she could give any details, Miyano and the others returned, discovered what she had done, and punished her severely for her attempt at freedom. The punishment for this escape attempt was brutal. Miyano and the others beat Junko mercilessly, targeting her face until it was swollen beyond recognition. They burned her legs with cigarette lighters and beat her with heavy objects. This pattern would repeat throughout her captivity. Any sign of resistance or disobedience was met with escalating violence. As days turned into weeks, the torture became increasingly sadistic and bizarre. The perpetrators forced Junko to eat live cockroaches and drink her own urine. They inserted foreign objects into her genitals, causing severe damage. They hung her from the ceiling and used her as a punching bag, taking turns beating her. One particularly horrific incident involved fireworks. The boys forced them into Junko's ears, mouth, and vagina before lighting them. The pain and damage caused by this act are unimaginable. They also dripped hot wax on her face and eyelids, laughing as she writhed in agony. Food and water were given sparingly, leading to severe malnutrition. When Junko was fed, it was often spoiled or rotting food. Sometimes, she was forced to eat her own vomit. The physical toll on her body was immense, compounded by the constant sexual assaults and beatings. The psychological torture was equally severe. Junko was forced to call her parents and tell them she had run away and was safe with friends. This cruel act prolonged her family's anguish and prevented them from effectively searching for her. The perpetrators also threatened to kill her family if she disobeyed or tried to escape again. As the weeks wore on, Junko's body began to deteriorate rapidly. Her face was so swollen that it was unrecognizable. The burns and wounds on her body became infected, emitting a foul odor. She lost control of her bladder and bowels due to the severe internal injuries she had suffered. Despite her dire condition, the torture did not abate. If anything, it intensified. The perpetrators dropped heavy dumbbells onto her stomach, rupturing her internal organs. They sprayed her with mace, forcing her to breathe in the painful chemical. They even forced her to sleep outside on the balcony in the cold winter air, exacerbating her weakened condition. Throughout this ordeal, Minato's parents were present in the house. They claimed later to have been unaware of the extent of what was happening, but it strains credulity to imagine they were completely oblivious to the presence of a captive girl and the comings and goings of numerous young men. The most chilling aspect of this case is perhaps the sheer number of people who were aware of or participated in Junko's torture. Over the course of those 44 days, more than 10 individuals, most of them young men and boys from the area, visited the Minato house and participated in or witnessed Junko's abuse. Some paid money for the privilege of raping or torturing her. Others simply watched, treating the horrific scene as a form of entertainment. This widespread complicity raises disturbing questions about the social dynamics at play. How could so many people participate in or witness such cruelty without intervening? Some later claim they were afraid of Miyano and his supposed Yakuza connections. Others seem to view Junko as less than human, a mere object for their amusement. As December turned to January, Junko's condition deteriorated rapidly. She was barely conscious most of the time, her body a mass of wounds, burns, and infections. Yet even in this state, the torture continued. On January 4, 1989, the 44th day of her captivity, Junko's ordeal reached its brutal conclusion. Miyano and the others, apparently angered by her weakness and the smell emanating from her infected wounds, decided to punish her one final time. They beat her with an iron barbell, kicked her, and dropped weights onto her stomach. The internal damage was catastrophic. Junko went into convulsions and lost consciousness. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the perpetrators continued their assault, taking turns hitting her with the barbell. Finally, after this last savage beating, Junko Furuta's battered body could take no more. She died, alone and in agony, surrounded by her tormentors. Even in death, Junko was afforded no dignity. Realizing she had died, the perpetrators wrapped her body in blankets and shoved it into a travel bag. They then placed the bag into a 55-gallon drum, filled it with concrete, and disposed of it at a construction site in Koto, Tokyo. Before disposing of the body, the perpetrators made one last cruel gesture. They took Junko's school uniform and set it on fire in a nearby park, as if attempting to erase all evidence of her existence. The disposal of Junko's body marked the end of her physical suffering, but it was far from the end of the case. The ripple effects of this horrific crime would continue to spread, affecting not just those directly involved, but Japanese society as a whole. In the days following Junko's death, life for her killers continued almost as normal. Miyano and the others showed no signs of remorse or concern. They continued their delinquent behavior, seemingly unbothered by the weight of their actions. It wasn't until March 29, 1989, nearly 3 months after Junko's death, that the truth began to emerge. Miyano and Ogura had been arrested for the gang rape of another girl. During questioning about this separate incident, Miyano, believing his accomplices had already confessed, admitted to killing Junko. This confession led police to the location where Junko's body had been dumped. The discovery of her remains, encased in concrete, shocked the nation. As details of her 44-day ordeal emerged, the public reacted with horror and outrage. The brutality of the crime was compounded by the youth of the perpetrators and the sheer number of people who had been involved or aware of Junko's captivity. It forced Japan to confront uncomfortable truths about juvenile delinquency, societal indifference, and the potential for cruelty that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most orderly society. Junko's parents, who had been searching desperately for their daughter since her disappearance, were devastated by the news. The knowledge of what their beloved daughter had endured in her final weeks was almost too much to bear. Yet they would face further pain as the case progressed through the justice system. The arrest of Miyano, Ogura, Minato, and Watanabe was just the beginning of a long and complex legal process. As the investigation deepened, the full horror of what had happened in that house in Adaki became clear. The evidence collected painted a picture of cruelty so extreme that it was hard for many to believe. Forensic examination of Junko's body revealed the extent of her injuries. She had been burned with cigarettes on over 50% of her body. Her face was so swollen and discolored that she was unrecognizable. Internal examinations showed severe damage to her internal organs, including her brain, which had shrunk from repeated trauma. As the case moved to trial, the public's attention was fixed on the proceedings. The brutality of the crime had struck a chord with the nation, forcing people to confront the dark undercurrents running through their society. How could such a thing happen? How could so many people be complicit in such cruelty? The trial itself was a grueling process, with graphic testimony detailing the horrors Junko had endured. The four main perpetrators showed little remorse, often smirking or laughing during proceedings. Their apparent lack of empathy or understanding of the gravity of their actions only served to deepen the public's outrage. Throughout the trial, disturbing details continued to emerge. It became clear that this wasn't just a case of four delinquent youths, but a broader failure of society. The involvement of so many others, the inaction of adults who might have intervened, all pointed to deeper, systemic issues. As the trial progressed, questions were raised about the responsibility of Minato's parents, who claimed to have been unaware of what was happening in their home. While they were not charged with any crime, their failure to notice or intervene in the ongoing torture happening under their roof was widely criticized. The case also shed light on the issue of bullying and violence in schools. Miyano's history of being severely bullied, which seemed to have contributed to his descent into delinquency, sparked debates about the handling of bullying in Japanese schools. After months of testimony and deliberation, the court finally reached its verdict. The sentences handed down, however, were far lighter than many expected, sparking further controversy and debate. Hiroshi Miyano, the ringleader, received a sentence of 17 years in prison, later increased to 20 years on appeal. Joe Ogura was sentenced to 8 years, Nobuharu Minato to 5 to 9 years, and Yasushi Watanabe to 5 to 7 years. These sentences, especially given the brutality of the crime, were seen by many as far too lenient. The conclusion of the trial did not bring closure to the case. Instead, it opened up new debates about juvenile justice, societal responsibility, and the adequacy of the legal system in dealing with such extreme cases of cruelty. For Junko's family, no sentence could ever be enough to compensate for their loss. The knowledge of what their daughter had endured in her final weeks would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Yet they were forced to watch as her killers received what many viewed as slaps on the wrist. The case of Junko Furuta stands as one of the most horrific crimes in modern Japanese history. The brutal details of her 44 days of torture and the subsequent handling of the case continue to shock and disturb people to this day. It serves as a grim reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the consequences of societal indifference. As we reflect on this tragedy, we are forced to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature, social responsibility, and the systems we put in place to protect the vulnerable. The hope is that by remembering Junko and the horror she endured, we can work towards creating a society where such a thing could never happen again. Investigation and trial. The investigation into the murder of Junko Furuta began in earnest on March 29, 1989, when her body was discovered in a concrete-filled drum at a construction site in Koto, Tokyo. However, the events leading up to this discovery paint a disturbing picture of missed opportunities and systemic failures. During Junko's 44-day captivity, there were several instances where intervention could have saved her life. Early in her ordeal, Junko managed to call the police when briefly left alone. However, she was discovered before she could provide any details, and the call was not thoroughly investigated. This represents a crucial missed opportunity that, if properly followed up, could have led to Junko's rescue. Another potential turning point came in late December when Minato's brother caught a glimpse of Junko and questioned her presence. Junko, terrified and beaten, was unable to ask for help, and Minato's brother did not pursue the matter further. This incident highlights the culture of non-intervention that allowed the crime to continue. The discovery of Junko's body came about not through diligent police work, but as a result of an unrelated arrest. Miyano and Ogura had been detained for the gang rape of another girl, and during questioning, Miyano, believing his accomplices had already confessed, admitted to killing Junko. This confession led police to the site where Junko's body had been dumped. The discovery of her remains, encased in concrete, shocked investigators and set in motion a comprehensive investigation that would uncover the full horror of what Junko had endured. Forensic examination of Junko's body revealed the extent of her injuries. Her face was so swollen and discolored that she was unrecognizable. Burns from cigarettes covered over 50% of her body. Internal examinations showed severe damage to her organs, including her brain, which had shrunk from repeated trauma. The coroner's report made for grim reading, detailing weeks of sustained abuse and torture. As the investigation progressed, police began to uncover the network of individuals who had been involved in or aware of Junko's captivity. Through interrogations and witness statements, it became clear that far more people than the four main perpetrators had participated in or known about the crime. This wide circle of involvement presented both opportunities and challenges for the investigation. On one hand, it provided a wealth of potential witnesses and evidence. On the other, it raised disturbing questions about why no one had come forward earlier, and complicated the process of determining culpability. The arrest of the four main perpetrators, Miyano, Ogura, Minato, and Watanabe, was swiftly followed by a series of other arrests. However, given the sheer number of individuals involved and the limitations of the juvenile justice system, many of those who had participated in Junko's torture faced only minor charges or no legal consequences at all. As the case moved to trial, prosecutors faced the challenge of presenting the full scope of the crime while navigating the complexities of trying juvenile offenders. The brutality of the crime had captured public attention, and there was immense pressure to secure severe sentences for the perpetrators. The trial began in 1990, with the four main defendants being tried as adults due to the severity of their crimes. The courtroom became a stage for the unfolding of a horror story that captivated and repulsed the nation in equal measure. Prosecutors presented a meticulous case, drawing on forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and the confessions of the accused. They painted a vivid picture of Junko's 44 days of torment, sparing no detail in their quest to convey the true brutality of the crime. One of the most chilling aspects of the trial was the demeanor of the defendants. Far from showing remorse, they often appeared indifferent or even amused during proceedings. Miyano, in particular, was noted for his arrogant attitude, often smirking or laughing as the details of his crimes were recounted. The defense strategy largely centered on attempting to minimize their clients' roles in the crime. Lawyers for Ogura, Minato, and Watanabe tried to portray them as followers who had been coerced or influenced by the more dominant Miyano. Miyano's defense, conversely, attempted to distribute blame among all participants, arguing that he should not be held solely responsible for a crime in which so many had taken part. Throughout the trial, the question of how so many people could have been involved without the crime being reported loomed large. Witnesses, including some who had participated in Junko's abuse, were called to testify. Their accounts often revealed a disturbing lack of empathy and a failure to recognize the gravity of their actions. One of the most controversial aspects of the trial was the discussion of Minato's parents' role. While they were not charged with any crime, their failure to intervene or even notice what was happening in their home came under intense scrutiny. Their testimony, in which they claimed to have been unaware of Junko's presence, strained credulity and highlighted the broader societal issues at play. The trial also brought to light the backgrounds of the perpetrators, particularly Miyano's history of being bullied. This sparked debates about the handling of bullying in Japanese schools and its potential role in creating individuals capable of such cruelty. As the trial progressed, it became clear that this case was forcing Japan to confront uncomfortable truths about its society. The involvement of so many young people, the failure of adults to intervene, and the seemingly random nature of the victim selection all pointed to deeper, systemic issues. After months of testimony and deliberation, the court finally reached its verdict in July 1990. Hiroshi Miyano, identified as the ringleader, was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Joe Ogura received a sentence of 8 years, Nobuharu Minato 5 to 9 years, and Yasushi Watanabe 5 to 7 years. These sentences were met with widespread public outrage. Many felt they were far too lenient given the extreme brutality of the crime. The fact that the perpetrators were tried as juveniles, despite the adult nature of their crimes, was a particular point of contention. In response to the public outcry, prosecutors appealed the sentences. In July 1991, a Tokyo High Court revised Miyano's sentence, increasing it to 20 years. The sentences for the other 3 perpetrators remained unchanged. Even with this increase, many felt that justice had not been served. The disparity between the horrific nature of the crime and the relatively short sentences highlighted what many saw as inadequacies in the Japanese juvenile justice system. For Junko's family, the trial and its outcome were a source of immense pain. They were forced to sit through graphic descriptions of their daughter's suffering, only to see her killers receive what many viewed as slaps on the wrist. The family's grief was compounded by their frustration with a system that seemed to prioritize the rehabilitation of juvenile offenders over justice for victims. The conclusion of the trial did not bring closure to the case. Instead, it opened up new debates about juvenile justice, societal responsibility, and the adequacy of the legal system in dealing with such extreme cases of cruelty. The case led to calls for reform of the juvenile justice system in Japan. Many argued that serious crimes committed by minors should be tried in adult courts, with the possibility of harsher sentences. Others pointed to the need for better intervention programs to prevent troubled youth from descending into such extreme behavior. The role of the media in the case also came under scrutiny. While some outlets were praised for their thorough coverage, others were criticized for sensationalizing the crime or for protecting the identities of the perpetrators even after their names had become public knowledge. In the years following the trial, the case of Junko Furuta continued to resonate in Japanese society. It became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the potential for cruelty that can exist beneath the surface of even the most orderly society. The investigation and trial of Junko Furuta's murderers exposed deep-seated issues in Japanese society and its legal system. It highlighted the dangers of societal indifference, the inadequacies of the juvenile justice system, and the potential consequences of failing to address bullying and delinquency. While the legal proceedings may have concluded, the case continues to provoke discussion and debate. It stands as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, intervention, and compassion in preventing such tragedies. The hope is that by remembering Junko and the failures that led to her suffering, society can work towards ensuring that such a crime never happens again. Evaluation and impact of the incident. The aftermath of the Junko Furuta case has been long-lasting and far-reaching, impacting Japanese society on multiple levels and continuing to provoke discussion and debate even decades after the crime. The case has left an indelible mark on Japan's collective consciousness, forcing the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about juvenile delinquency, societal indifference, and the justice system. One of the most immediate impacts of the case was on the perpetrators themselves. Despite the relatively light sentences they received, their lives after release have been far from easy. Hiroshi Miyano, the ringleader, was released in 2009 after serving his 20-year sentence. Upon release, he underwent a name change, adopting his foster parents' surname and becoming known as Hiroshi Yokoyama. However, this attempt at a fresh start was short-lived. In 2013, Miyano was arrested again, this time on suspicion of fraud related to a telephone scam operation. While he was ultimately not indicted due to lack of evidence, this incident suggested that Miyano had not fully rehabilitated despite his time in prison. There have been unconfirmed reports about Miyano's life post-release, including claims that he has been involved in multi-level marketing schemes and maintains connections with organized crime. These reports, while not officially verified, have kept Miyano in the public eye and serve as a reminder of the challenges of reintegrating violent offenders into society. Joe Ogura, who received an 8-year sentence, also changed his name upon release, becoming Joe Kamisaku. In a disturbing echo of his original crime, Kamisaku was arrested again in 2004 for assaulting and confining a woman in his apartment. This incident, occurring 15 years after Furuta's murder, shocked the public and reignited discussions about the effectiveness of Japan's rehabilitation programs for juvenile offenders. Nobuharu Minato and Yasushi Watanabe, who received the lightest sentences, have managed to maintain lower profiles since their release. However, their whereabouts and current situations remain topics of public interest and speculation. The post-release lives of these men highlight the challenges of rehabilitation and reintegration for juvenile offenders who commit severe crimes. Their struggles to lead law-abiding lives have been used as arguments both for and against Japan's juvenile justice system, with some pointing to their recidivism as evidence of the system's failure, while others argue that their difficulties underscore the need for more comprehensive rehabilitation programs. Beyond the individual perpetrators, the Junko Furuta case has had a profound impact on Japanese society and its legal system. The case sparked intense debate about the treatment of juvenile offenders and led to calls for reform of the juvenile justice system. In the years following the trial, Japan did implement some changes to its juvenile law. In 2000, the law was revised to lower the age at which offenders could be tried as adults from 16 to 14 for certain serious crimes. This change was partly influenced by public outrage over cases like Furuta's, where the perpetrators of heinous crimes received what many viewed as overly lenient sentences due to their age. The case also led to increased awareness and discussion of bullying and violence in schools. Miyano's history of being severely bullied, which seemed to have contributed to his descent into delinquency, sparked debates about the handling of bullying in Japanese schools. This has resulted in more stringent anti-bullying policies and greater emphasis on early intervention in cases of school violence. Another significant impact of the case has been on public perception of crime and safety in Japan. The Furuta case, along with other high-profile crimes in the late 1980s and early 1990s, challenged Japan's image as a uniquely safe society. It forced the public to confront the reality that even in a society known for its low crime rates, horrific acts of violence could occur. This shift in perception has led to increased vigilance and community policing efforts. Many neighborhoods have implemented watch programs and improved communication channels with local law enforcement. While these changes can't be attributed solely to the Furuta case, it certainly played a role in awakening public consciousness to the potential for crime in their midst. The case has also had a lasting impact on media coverage of crime in Japan. The brutal details of Furuta's ordeal and the subsequent trial were extensively covered by Japanese media, often in graphic detail. This led to debates about the ethics of crime reporting and the balance between public interest and respect for victims and their families. In the years since, there has been a noticeable shift in how Japanese media reports on violent crimes, particularly those involving juveniles. While still comprehensive, reporting tends to be more restrained, with greater consideration given to the impact on victims' families and the potential consequences of sensationalism. From a legal and criminological perspective, the Furuta case continues to be studied and discussed. It is often cited in debates about the nature of evil, the psychology of group violence, and the limits of juvenile rehabilitation. Criminal psychologists have pointed to the case as an extreme example of the bystander effect and the dangers of group mentality in criminal behavior. Legal scholars often use the case to illustrate the challenges of balancing justice, rehabilitation, and public safety in cases involving juvenile offenders. The relatively light sentences received by Furuta's killers are frequently cited in arguments for tougher penalties for serious juvenile crimes. For the victims' rights movement in Japan, the Furuta case has become a rallying point. The perceived leniency of the sentences and the focus on rehabilitating the offenders rather than punishing them has been a source of ongoing frustration for victims' advocates. This has led to calls for greater consideration of victims' perspectives in the judicial process and improved support services for crime victims and their families. The case has also had a significant cultural impact. It has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and even fictionalized accounts in film and television. While some of these works have been criticized for exploiting Furuta's tragedy, others have been praised for raising awareness about the case and its implications for society. In the realm of popular culture, the case has become a sort of dark legend, often referenced in discussions of true crime and societal ills. It has inspired works of art, music, and literature, each grappling with the horror of the crime and its implications for humanity. For Furuta's family, the impact of the crime has been immeasurable and ongoing. They have had to cope not only with the loss of their daughter but also with the public nature of her death and the continued media attention on the case. Their grief has been compounded by what many see as the failure of the justice system to adequately punish their daughter's killers. In a rare public statement years after the trial, Furuta's parents expressed their ongoing pain and frustration. They spoke of their difficulty in finding closure when their daughter's killers had received such light sentences and were free to live their lives while their daughter was gone forever. Their words serve as a poignant reminder of the long-lasting trauma inflicted by such heinous crimes, not just on the immediate victims, but on their loved ones as well. As Japan continues to grapple with issues of juvenile crime, bullying, and societal responsibility, the case of Junko Furuta remains a touchstone. It serves as a grim reminder of the potential for cruelty that exists within society and the consequences of failing to intervene in the face of evil. The legacy of the Junko Furuta case is complex and multifaceted. It has influenced legal reforms, shaped public perception of crime and safety, impacted media practices, and sparked ongoing debates about justice, rehabilitation, and societal responsibility. Perhaps most importantly, it continues to serve as a call to vigilance, a reminder of the importance of speaking out against cruelty and injustice wherever they are found. As we reflect on this tragic case and its far-reaching impacts, we are reminded of the responsibility we all share in creating a society where such horrors cannot occur. The memory of Junko Furuta and the failures that led to her suffering continue to challenge us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more willing to intervene when we see injustice. In this way, perhaps, some small measure of meaning can be derived from her senseless and tragic death.